I think I already canceled our PG-13 rating.
I said it before and I'll say it again. Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Never fear change. Life is too short for fear. Chase what is desired.
I can do this all day.
Would you mind identifying what you are?
We're the best friends squad.
That's what we call ourselves. Sort of like a team.
Welcome to the rodeo. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride.
This is the way.
I have spoken.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty shows at the movies at the virtual New Zealand Worldcon.
I've been here before, over and over again, and each time the same question. Is this it? Will this time be the one? And each time the same answer. But I'm just so tired of it.
It's like she's in the room.
Well, great. Well, I'm Sean, in case you didn't know.
I'm Jen.
And today we are here for a live discussion of the Netflix original adaptation, The Old Guard, and we'll talk also about the wild world of comic book adaptations.
Sort of.
Do
you want to introduce our guests?
That's literally the next part in the script that you're supposed to be following. We are supposed to be professionals, Jen.
I am not a professional, so you might as well just get over that right now. So, to help us discuss this movie and comic book adaptations, we've solicited the support of three immortals.
Technically, yeah.
Technically? Are there four immortals here? Did I miss one?
Or are we technically immortal?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't really want to test it today, though, so we'll see. But if you guys could go about introducing yourselves, and we will start with Wendy.
Hi, I'm Wendy Brown. I'm the publisher of Women Write About Comics, and I love comics. So here we are.
Fantabulous. I was supposed to go in an order, and I didn't. So,
Yeah,
Alistair, why don't you go next?
Okay.
We're completely off the rails already.
Just
off the rails.
Hello, I'm Alistair. I am the co-owner of Escape Artist Podcasts. I host Pseudopod, which is a horror fiction podcast. I write The Full Lid, which is a pop culture newsletter, and I've written quite a lot about the Old Guard. And I'm a Best Fan Writer finalist this year.
And Best Semi-Prozine.
And Best Semi-Prozine finalist.
I'm Marguerite Kenner. I am the other half of the Escape Artists.
I love her.
Yeah, I love him too. So that's convenient because we're here in front of the same camera. I'm on Twitter as Legal Valkyrie. I am fandom's data protection lawyer these days. And I love the Old Guard comic too.
Yay!
Awesome.
I'm glad we all love the thing we're talking about.
Well, that does help, certainly. So, before we dive in, just a reminder for all the folks that are listening, we have a chat room option for Zoom, so if you guys want to have conversations and stuff, please use that for that purpose. But if you'd like to lay down questions for us, there should be a Q... Oh, no, there's just a chat function. We don't have a Q&A function, so already the script's irrelevant. So if you can, put questions up in the chat, and we'll try to keep track of them in the chat. Otherwise, have fun in the chat. So, we got to talk about this movie.
We do. So let's get right down to it. Let's start though with the synopsis, and we have sacrificed Alistair to the synopsis gods today. So, Alistair.
I have, in fact, volunteered as tribute. The Old Guard is about a group of immortals led by Andy, formerly known as Andromache of Scythia, who is over 6,000 years old. She, along with Crusader murder husbands Nicky and Joe, and Napoleonic soldier Booker, have spent the centuries conducting the closest thing they can find to the good fight. But they are very old and they are very tired. So things take a turn when they begin dreaming of the first new immortal for centuries, Niall, a young Marine who is killed in Afghanistan and then gets back up. Complicating matters even further is a remarkably evil tech bro who has decided he wants to dissect them to death in order to basically sell their immortality, and the always ticking clock of the fact that these people are immortal until they aren't.
Well done.
Yes.
That was good.
Yeah, I knew Alistair would kill it. So what we're going to start with is what we always start with when we are doing our movie discussions is, before we get into quote-unquote spoiler territory, if you guys could give us your general impressions of the movie. And let's start with Wendy again, because I don't like going in order.
Well, I love Charlize Theron, so it's an automatic win for me. And I love her as a older woman doing action. She's the same age as me, so I'd like to pretend that I can do that too. So I enjoyed the movie. There were parts that weren't fantastic, but it's a comic book blockbuster, and it's allowed to be good and bad. So that's my feeling on it.
Absolutely. How about you, Marguerite?
So I watched the movie before I read the comic, so I probably have a slightly different experience than other people have. I love the movie because it gave me very much that kind of Ripley as an older woman who wasn't going to put up with any shit vibe. I love that the main character and basically the lens that the movie wants us to look through is Niles' eyes, which is very refreshing to see a black woman in a super heroic sort of role take center stage. I knew nothing about Nikki and Joe, and now I desperately want their 60k enemies to lovers slow burn fanfic origin story. So general impressions were I liked it. I liked the pacing. I like how it threaded in potential follow-up. Yeah, my overall impression was it was good.
Fantastic. Alistair?
I really enjoyed it. I had read the comic prior to it, and there were a couple of things I was bracing for to be a little bit choppy, and I was very pleased to see that those were things which had not made it to the big screen. I was even more pleased to see one specific thing had made it word for word and beat for beat to the big screen, but we'll get to that.
We will indeed. Sean, do you want to go next?
Yeah, so I think I just want to parrot a lot of what everybody else has said. Like, this is very well paced. It takes its times to breathe at really the right times instead of having endless action. And it doesn't plod along too much, which I really appreciate, especially given that you're going to have Charlize Theron basically running around shooting people in the face and punching them and stabbing them and hitting them with a really awesome looking axe. So it is a lot of fun to watch. I also really just enjoyed the way that this treats a very familiar theme that we've seen in a lot of sort of fantasy, which is the idea of immortals and like what happens when they enter the modern world, and predictably, right, annoying tech bros get involved, played by a Dursley. Yeah, so there's just a lot to really enjoy. I think it's a very well done film. I'm sure we'll have some criticisms for some of its portrayals. I also have come a different direction from Alistair, which is that I read the comics after watching the film, and I was really... we'll come back to it, I'm sure. I was just really surprised by what parts were almost beat for beat and what parts they kind of borrowed from the second sequence of comics. So, and I'm sure we'll come back to it. So I'll throw it over to you, Jen.
Well, I mean, that is the second half of our discussion today, so you just jumped right ahead of everything.
Look, you screwed up the script already from the start, so you don't get to get in on me on this.
That's true, I don't. So my general impressions is that I loved it. Obviously, I had not read the comic, unfortunately, beforehand, or fortunately. I'm not actually sure which way I go on that for this one. And again, we'll get into that for the second half of the discussion. But obviously, I agree with Marguerite. It was really nice to see Niall as the lens of sorts by which we interact with these characters. And put, more importantly, on even footing with Charlize Theron's Andromache as the older, wiser one. So they were kind of in this, very balanced place with the three male characters a little bit more off to the side, although obviously they have some very prominent roles to play in the film, and that love speech is just the most beautiful thing in the entire world. Action sequences, some of the best action sequences I've seen in a movie in a long time. I was trying to find who the stunt coordinator was, so if any of you know, we'll talk about that in a little bit. That'd be awesome to share that. Specifically, like, the use of guns and ancient weapons. Gorgeous, inspiring, and just so amazing. So I loved it. Obviously, I think there are a couple of like slightly shaky points, but we will get into those after we hit the spoiler wall, which I hope all of you that are watching / listening live realize that we are going to spoil the hell out of this film. So if you have not seen it or read the comic books, this is your warning. Shall we do our sounds, Sean?
No, Jen. Let's just keep going. No.
You didn't tell me there'd be a musical number.
Do the sounds.
Do the sounds.
Do more of them.
Do the sounds.
All right, let's get into the actual focus of the movie, and I'll start us off because you brought up all of the stunt stuff, which I think are pretty incredible. And if I'm correct, the stunt coordinators are Bryson Counts and Adam Curley. There may be others involved. The stunt people list is really long. I just want to note, like, the end credits alone for this film are like 380 minutes long, just because of the number of people they have to credit. It's really quite impressive. I got to the end of the movie and got to that like post-credits kind of scene, and then saw how much time was left on the timer and was like, is there another one at the end? Like, are they doing a Marvel thing? No, it's just that many people they have to thank. It's a lot of people. And so Bryson Counts has done things like Black Panther and Planet of the Apes, and Curly has done things like I believe, Bourne Ultimatum, a couple of others. And they've done some other, like, more fantasy ones. But the stunts are really, really good. And I want to say good in two ways. One is that the performers do a pretty remarkable job at making what they do, where it's clear that it's their physical bodies doing it. They do a pretty good job of making it look like they're really doing the movements. And then also when they are shooting where it's clearly stunt performers, they do it in a way that you don't really notice unless you're slowing it down and trying to pay attention to it. It does a really remarkable job. Also, I think, Jen, you're right. The gun sequences, like, most of you have seen Equilibrium, so you remember, like, the gun kata thing where it's like, ja, 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 right? And they're doing all the thing. Yeah, and it looks really cool, but then when you think about it practically, you're like, this doesn't make any sense. But this whole movie, I was like, yeah, of course, when she puts a shotgun on the ground and then smashes his face straight into it and it blows his head off, that's totally a normal move that you would do. It's just very well done. And they do a lot of both with sort of melee combat stuff with hand. So there's a great sequence in a plane when Charlize Theron's character is fighting Nile, which is really well done. And there are great gun sequences and even really good ones involving swords and other kinds of pokey things. So
yeah,
it's a lot of fun. It's like Charlize Theron having her like Keanu Reeves, like, but she just gets, as she ages, she just gets more badass. And I don't know how she does it. I think she's an immortal. I think that's what it is.
I think she actually is Andromache, frankly. So let's go to Alistair. Alistair, any thoughts on the stunts and this film as an action movie?
Yeah, I just echoing what's already been said, that they are technically incredibly impressive, and they're also really impressive from a narrative point of view, because this really is one of those movies where action defines and focuses on character. And there are two moments which really jumped out at me for that. During one of the end fights, there is a point where Joe rushes someone, throws him over his back, and keeps moving because he knows Nikki is 2 steps behind him, who does something else to him, and then moves on, knowing Niall is 2 steps behind him, and she finishes the guy off. And that idea of trust and synchronicity is something which action movies have in the past often really struggled with. Because, realistically, you get a group of actors in one place and 6 former Delta Force guys, and they are going to move and think very differently in those two groups of people. I bought that this was a troop of humans who have been together for hundreds of years in about 2 minutes. And the other beat that I really liked was there is a point, again, I think, in that closing fight, where one of them is killed temporarily because they're immortal. And one of the other characters is genuinely very worried, even though this has obviously happened thousands of times before. And the way that the immortality is handled, I think, is really interesting, because it is both something which everyone uses differently, and it's also something which everyone uses as a resource, not a shield. It still hurts, and seeing other people go down still hurts. And I thought that was a grace note that really deserved kind of pulling out and looking at.
I think we watched a video interview that Theron gave about the training sequences for it, and she made a couple of really interesting points in that. One, they specifically designed the fight scenes to use as many forms of martial arts as possible to try and illustrate that the characters had been picking up tips and techniques from different countries for literally centuries. And they rattled off a list of like 27 different forms, both melee and gun forms, like Sean was talking about. I think one of her gun instructors was actually the gun instructor on John Wick. So they've pulled narrative thread there from the integrated conservation of movement approach to gunfighting, which of course blends very well with the combined melee style. The other thing that I remember Theron saying in that interview was that I think they scheduled her for something like 5 months worth of training, and she found out that that was longer than the other guys, and it pissed her off. And so she decided she was going to learn everything faster, thank you very much. And it just very much speaks to her evolution as an actress, and that she has reached a point where she is not interested in playing second fiddle or being catered to as being, you know, the A-list actress. She wants to get in there, get into character, and get her hands dirty. Like, quite literally, I think she suffered several injuries during both the training and the filming that directly related to the stunts.
Absolutely. You said an interesting thing in there, Alistair, which was not as a shield, but as and I forget the second word you said, because that's how my brain works at this part of my day. But what I thought when you said that was, until they did use their immortality as a shield, which was a really crucial turning point in the film, which is that Charlize Theron's character loses her immortality. Maybe.
Ish.
We don't know.
Maybe. Kinda.
Yeah. So I'm curious, Wendy, what you thought of that transition, like how Andromache's character shifted and how the team dynamic shifted when she, quote unquote, loses her immortality.
Well, I mean, the movie starts off with her wanting this to be the last time, but it's so, and when she loses that immortality, it's very clear that she's fine with, okay, I'm done. I can be the shield, but everybody else is still like, no, we're still a team. And I was really impressed with the very much teamwork element of the whole thing. And so even though the dynamic shifted where we knew Charlize could always, or Andromache could always go in and be the one to take out, you know, everybody, the others are like, no, we're going to come in and we're going to do team stuff now. So sorry, no more of those, you know, on your own thing. So I really appreciated the way it still allowed her, she was still their leader. And they still fully respected her. They weren't babying her in any way, but just, it was still that very much team, we're going to protect you now. So you're still one of us. You're still fully capable, but you might need a few more Band-Aids. So we're going to take this shot.
And I also like how quickly that is resolved. They don't spend 4 minutes dragging out the drama of, alas, I shall be injured and must stand behind my team. No, it's very quickly okay, I don't like this. And later on, I may throw some punches about this, but right now, while bullets are literally flying, I'm going to swallow this and we're going to move on. They don't really, like, eke it out or overdo it with any sort of ridiculous posturing or anything.
Well, it's interesting you say that because one of my favorite moments is actually when she kind of does posture, but it's part of the action narrative as opposed to something that is spoken. So there's that scene where she picks up the fire axe and then is like, and we're trying to keep this PG-13, but fuck this noise. And she goes in fighting. Thank you, Marguerite, for keeping track. She goes in fighting and leaves everybody behind. And in that moment, she's really risking herself and kind of reaffirming her capabilities. So I'm going to go to Sean because I haven't let him talk very much because I'm a horrible person.
You are. You're a monster. You're a monster.
I am.
I think what's interesting about the scene is, for her character, the entire film, and even in like the dialogue, but also how she presents herself, she's the person that's very much point all the time, right? She doesn't spend a lot of time like, let's think about this and like, we'll figure out, no, I'm going to burst into this room and I'm going to F everything up and I'm going to, you know, beat them up with my axe or shoot them or whatever. And like, she's super aggressive. And suddenly she's got this vulnerability that she's never had anymore. And everyone else is saying, we need to like, kind of like be a little bit more like subdued, because if you get shot in the head, this is like the end for you. Theoretically, right? The implication is that she has lost the ability to heal, whether or not
even
that's
permanent is unclear. Even though she takes a bullet to the spine and just keeps going for 40 minutes. Yeah, exactly.
It's on the side, and it's kind of kidney liver area. And to be honest, like all the alcohol she's been drinking her entire 6,000 years of life, does she really need a liver?
Probably not. It doesn't seem
I don't think
important.
so. Yeah.
We'll come back to that point in specific.
But I guess what I'm getting at is that it's such a good character moment because it's the thing that the entire movie she's not supposed to do from a character perspective, which is stop and realize like I'm more vulnerable here and I need to be more careful. No. She's like, screw this. I'm going to go axe everybody down, which has to be really scary when the immortal that you now know is no longer immortal has no care left anymore and is still coming at you with a fire axe. Like that's more terrifying than when they're just running around like getting up from bullets. Like that's kind of scary, but then like that's even worse. And it's great the way that Merrick dies also, because he gets tackled his way out the window by Niall straight into a car, which it's got to be a mess. You got to be thinking a lot. I mean, there's this great moment in the comic when they actually have a conversation in the air, which is really funny.
Can we talk about that scene when you're done with your thought?
Yeah, please. Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so the jumping out the window sequence in the movie is the kind of concluding climax. It's how the big bad is taken out, and it's an important character beat for Niall because she's the one who initiates it. It's her idea.
Mm-hmm.
She's become comfortable now enough with her immortality that she is literally weaponizing it to use it in defense of her team and in pursuit of their goal. Whereas in the comic, I don't want to say it's flippant, but it is another action beat kind of embedded in the middle, and it is initiated by Alex, as just kind of this is what we do as immortals. We throw ourselves out 37-story buildings and we have that little conversation. I love that they chose to reposition that because in a comic form, the fun part that we get out of that sequence is the conversation they have while falling. But in the movie, it's a visual, literal impact. And so they just kind of save it as the big pivotal moment at the end. And again, they give ownership and onus of it to Niall. And I really love that repositioning.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to next, because Niall obviously is a super important figure in the movie. As we said, she acts as the lens by which the audience is getting introduced to the characters and their lives as immortals. And so I'm going to go to Wendy for this. Talk to us about how, not only just about how Niall acts as that window, but how important it was for you even specifically to see a Black woman in that kind of role in this type of film.
Well, we also have a Black director behind the scenes,
yes.
So it's comforting to know that is happening, that hopefully we're on track to normalizing this so that you never have to ask me this question again.
Yeah, I'm really hoping.
So being able to see that, her natural hair and not just her, but, her friends, there were Latinx people in there, and we got to see her family, even though she didn't have a connection with that. It's so important. For me, I've got 2 children, and when they were younger and they saw movies and said, she looks like me, she looks like us, that brought me to tears. So I obviously don't start crying every time I see it now, but it's just, there's that little twinge of, thank you. So yeah. So, having read the comic, I'm really happy with the way the movie shifted to give her so much weight. She was very much, equal with Charlize's character, and almost to the point where you can kind of see it being set up that she gets to be the leader in the future. So again, just really impressive role there, and the relationship that they got to build, it was just so strong. So really happy to see something like that.
Absolutely. And how do you guys feel about her decision when she first rejects participation in the team and as an immortal, and then comes back to it? And I'll go to you, Marguerite.
I think kind of the emotional journey that Niall goes through is a very, and it seems strange to say this, but it's a very modern one. She has a very modern frame of reference, and so she is still young enough and inexperienced enough in the concept of immortality that she's worried about her family. But at the same time, Niall is an active servicewoman. She has dedicated her life to the support of a goal and a team. And the moment she realizes that a member of that team, even though she personally may be trying to distance herself, not so much distance herself, but pursuing other goals as priority, the moment she realizes that a member of her team has been jeopardized and that she is in a unique position to act, she doesn't even think about it. She literally just goes, wait, and then we see her moving, and that's it. They cut away. There's no conversation. There's no, for alas, they don't drag it out. It's a very quick decision that she's like, they're in trouble. They are my team. I'm going to help them.
And just building off that real quick, it kind of goes back to the earlier point about action driving character. Niall uses her immortality like a Marine. Her assault on that building is fascinating because she's constantly moving. She's constantly breaching a new room, and she's put down, gets back up, doesn't bother trying to fight back, and just keeps going in. And from this is a kind of odd word to say, but from a strategic point of view, it's fascinating because she's using it in a way that none of the others do, and that in turn speaks to the fact she's still inside her mortal lifespan. It's a good comparison with Booker, actually, because
right,
both in the comics and in the movies, what drives Booker to his decision, which, by the way, I paused the movie and turned to Alistair the moment we saw the attack in Paris and went, it's him. He's done it. Why else would he leave behind? I have plot senses. But Booker's entire narrative has been driven about the shame and the guilt he carries as a fact of his family. But Niall is driven by and has to put down the priority of her family and the time she has left with them because her team is imperiled. So comparing the two of them, again, it shows how Niall is grounded in a very different foundation than Booker is with the team.
Absolutely. Sean, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I was hoping we would come back to Booker because I think he's a really good counterpoint because he's also was the youngest of all of them. I mean, it's kind of hard to talk youngest for someone who's lived for hundreds of years, but compared to the other immortals, quote unquote, he is the youngest, right? He's only a couple years, 100 years old. He's only been around for a few centuries. And so he gets to have this really great moment where he sort of lets her know, and we see through a flashback what the consequence of trying to have a normal relation with everyday people is like. And specifically in the film, I don't think they make it clear that it's his son that rejects him on the deathbed. It's unclear. In the comics, it's his son, but it is clearly someone of great importance. And what he basically says is, like, what's going to happen is if you try to keep these contacts with people that love you, is eventually they're going to figure out what you are. And then when it gets really ugly for them, when they start to reach those points of death, they will start asking for the secret. And when you can't give it to them, they're going to call you a liar. And then he's basically saying, like, what you find out is that in the end, everybody turns ugly. And that's the last memory you have of your loved ones, is of them turning into monsters. And for Niall, I think she's, to some extent, like, she doesn't want to quite believe that because honor is really important in her family, right? And she like wants to hear her mother's voice again. She has this deep relationship, but it's like very tragic for Booker because he's had this experience and it's gone horrifically bad. And it's a pain that he can't get rid of because he can't even die, right? This is part of why he betrays everyone, is he just wants to die. He wants it all to end, and he can't end it. There's nothing he can do. He can't put a bullet in his head. He can't do nothing. He just has to live with this pain over and over and over. I'm not necessarily 100% convinced that Booker's, with his betrayal, I think I would have liked more of his character, but it makes a lot of sense, I think, in the direction it goes.
It's interesting to me that one of the key beats in the comics that did not make it into the movie is Achilles. And I think Andy's relationship with Achilles speaks to the same kind of situation, in that it is her experience of a man she falls in love with, a man she spends several decades with, who ages and dies. And the reason I bring up the point is because he doesn't turn on her. Ultimately, they do have a fight, and it is Andy's decision, or at least the way I read this, is Andy's decision to turn and walk away. And I always wonder whether Booker has been so closed off about that particular pain and his failure to engage with it. And I think that's true, because we see that in the betrayal reveal scene in the comic. He's, and to some extent in the movie, he's quite open about it. But they've never had that conversation before, and as a result, they've never been able to come to a peace with it, where Andy had that experience and could have helped Booker through it, whereas instead it becomes the seed of his dissent.
And there's also that really interesting beat that doesn't quite make it across to the movie, that Booker just misses out on photography.
Yeah,
He is a little too early. And if he had been born a couple of decades later, he'd have photos of his family. And he doesn't. All he has is that final memory.
About the Achilles part, I'm glad they didn't include that in the movie, because they were leaning on Andy not wanting Niall to contact her family, and you have the Booker stuff to back that up. So they tried to do that in the comic as well, but it doesn't make sense that they're still holding on to Niall should never contact her family when Andy did have a good story for that. So I think I'm glad that they took Achilles out of it, and for other reasons as well, but we can talk about that a little later.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious, and we'll start with you, Wendy, and we'll talk a little bit more about how this is a difference between the comic book and the film later, but one of the big beats just in the film is Quinn, obviously, and the sort of horrifying death that she goes through over and over and over again. I'm curious, Wendy, and everybody else, obviously, how you feel about the placement of that narrative works in the context of the film, separate from the comics, just within the context of the film.
Well, that makes our sequel. So that was pretty...
That's exactly it.
It strengthened Andy's conflict, because in the comic, she was very much, I'm done. Sleeping with people isn't any fun. Killing people isn't any fun. I just want to die. That's not any fun. She still doesn't have all that much to live for in the end. So in the movie, by giving her Quinn and giving her so much more depth to that relationship, it gives them all something to move towards, because they're also all dreaming about her. So yeah, I need a sequel. It needs to happen.
I would also add that it adds a bit to the threat for the characters, because, right, we do get the flashback of what happens to her, how she gets locked in the sea, and it's a pretty horrifying, right? They lock her in basically almost like one of those iron, it doesn't have spikes in it, but like one of those iron lung, like spiky Iron Maiden, whatever they called those, yeah. It just doesn't have spikes, and then they just chuck her in the ocean. And that's a horrifying way to go, and that one of them has witnessed it happening, at least insofar as watched her get shoved in it and sent away. It adds, like, when Merrick is trying to kidnap them and take them, like, they've lived with centuries with the threat of what could happen to them if people figure out who they are and come for them. And so I think it just adds a depth to that threat, that this isn't something minor, that this is, like, there's a reason why they're like, we don't hang out with regular normie people, like, we hang out in, like, caves and, like, all that kind of strange stuff, and hang on to Rodin sculptures that we probably should have sold a long time ago. Like, all of that. There's a reason for it, and it's because the threat is omnipresent for them. The second they're found by everyday people, either those people turn ugly to them or they try to harm them. And again, right, as we said very, very much at the beginning, right, they can die, but they don't die for very long periods of time, but they feel everything, just as we would. They may get more desensitized to it than you and I would, because we can only get shot so many times before we stop moving. But they feel all that pain. So when they get their hand cut off, it hurts. When someone stabs them, it hurts, right? All that is painful. So I think there's just a really great way that the film is adding all these elements together, just to remind us that, yeah, they're immortals, but they're not like, vampires who just, like, suck your blood and, like, they turn into super vampires and then they, like, fight the guy from the 80s. What was the guy in Blade who's just, like, the dick vampire?
I don't remember right now.
You know what I'm talking about. He's just like the dick vampire, just kills all the other vampires because he's mad that they didn't let him into the nice parties.
Absolutely.
That was Deacon Frost, and he was fantastic.
Yes.
He is fantastic, don't get me wrong, but he's still a dick vampire, just to be clear.
He was a good dick vampire.
That's true.
Yeah. Wendy?
I just wanted to add to that. I really liked the way the movie kind of spread out their deaths and how much it hurt. Like, in the comic, it's just one panel where they don't even actually die, when we've got, like, half a head blown off, but the next panel, they're almost healed already. So I appreciate that the movie was like, nope, they're dead, they're down, and this is going to take 5 minutes, and it's going to hurt to get back up, and they're still hurting as they, continue the fight. That gives you the asterisks on the immortality a lot more than the comic did.
Absolutely. Marguerite and Alistair?
I didn't like the Quinn character beat very much. I mean, it's obviously there to set up a sequel, and that's how it presented to me. I just don't buy that if finding her was that important to Andy, that she wouldn't have sold the Rodan and bought a submarine. It's a little discontinuity there for me. I know it's useful in that it illustrates, more points in time and, their origin story and then how long they've been together. And I think in the comic, she's mentioned in one panel once, but I'm with Wendy. I need the sequel. I need to know more. Is she the bad guy? Is she the redeemed antagonist? Is Booker going to double down? Is he going to drag her back? Are we going to learn more about the world? And has she spent the last few centuries intentionally not bumping into these four folks, recruiting everybody else that the four forgot? I need more. I need more context for how they're trying to use her.
Mm-hmm.
Wendy, did you want to respond?
I read her as Andy talked about the fact that she tried to find her and couldn't. So she didn't know where she was, and the ocean's pretty big. So I feel like an attempt was made, but after however many thousand years, now it's a case of fear, because we also know, like, we've had our other vampire movies and stuff, if you bury the vampire for too long, or if they live for too long, they start going crazy. And they did talk about the fact in the movie that, she's down there and just dying over and over and over again constantly. She's not going to be pretty when she comes out. So, yes, there's that sequel in that we're going to find her, but I can see Andy being very afraid of what we're going to find. And there could be, maybe she did get out and is doing all sorts of other stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of options, but I think for Andy, I feel like there's just a fear of, I tried really hard to find you, so.
Yeah, there's definitely that sort of concept of, I tried to find you, I failed, you're probably insane, tried to find.
Mm-hmm.
You're probably kind of insane now, you're really, really pissed off at me, I feel guilty, but this might be really, really bad for everybody.
It just kind of gets pushed down the to-do list, right? It's like, I could
just put that over here for now, It was funny for me because my kids and my husband right afterward were like, so that was iron. How long does it take for that to rust? Does it take 500 years at the bottom of a salty ocean? Or, what's the timeline on iron rusting? Because that's definitely going to play a role in how long Quinn was actually down there. And it's interesting because this is actually different from, this is the one thing I will mention as a difference to the comic right now, is that you're right, it's one panel, Quinn is thrown overboard, or rather Noriko in the comic book is thrown overboard, but not in an Iron Maiden. She's just tossed overboard, apparently can't swim, and keeps drowning repeatedly without being trapped in that Iron Maiden. So the Iron Maiden is like an extra level of both horror for Quinn and the horror that the immortals, the old guard, face from other non-immortal humans, which I found really interesting in terms of both their relationship to Quinn and Quinn's potential madness that Niall obviously refers to very briefly. Sean, did you want to say something?
Yeah, really, really important. Two things. One, I think for sure we're going to get in the next film, if it ever is made, Andy has left stuff out of this story, I think is what's going to happen. We're missing some information, which I like in film when that kind of happens, because Andy shouldn't be treated as a totally reliable narrator in a way, insofar as that works, right? There are things that she's clearly leaving out. So I think that's where that's going to go. The other thing is, I just want to note that I think this film very clearly tells us that James Cameron actually found her in the ocean while looking for the Titanic. And that's how she got out. So rusting is not the issue here. We made that
exact joke.
Yeah. So I know there were some in the comments saying, well, depending on oxygen levels, the rust may not be very rusty. I don't think that's the issue at all. I think that it's found definitely by James Cameron when he was making that Titanic documentary. So you can thank James Cameron for the sequel.
That, I guess, makes...
It's a sequel you can actually thank him for, because almost nobody wants to see Avatar 37, so...
why did you have to go there? Why did you even have to bring Avatar into this conversation?
Sorry. Not sorry.
Okay, so one of the things that I kind of wanted to hear opinions on was, one of the big fears of the old guard is that they will be caught out by technology. And that's a frame of reference that's much larger in the film, particularly. And I'm just curious how you guys think about how the team adapts over time, or doesn't, and how they treated their relationship to technology in this world, and particularly in terms of the Copley character, very specifically. And since Alistair just stepped away, Marguerite?
Yeah, he went to grab the comic. I asked him when the comic was written, because the way that Andy's in specific, well, kind of all their relationship with technology is handled in the comic is dated, shall we say. In that one of the key reveals is that Niall points out that Wi-Fi signals don't work through cave walls, and that's an important component. Whereas, I think it's the trailer for The Old Guard, we see Andy taking a selfie and getting into someone's phone and deleting photographs. 2017. Yep. Okay, so not that old in terms of presentation of technology.
But yeah, there's one of the other minor beats in there is that Andy in the comic is bad with tech. And Booker... I
hate... That's such lazy shorthand for immortal people. I hate that. Every single thing out there does the whole, I am old, I cannot use them. It's so stupid and lazy.
And Booker is good at technology, and in the movie they didn't do that, and it was good.
It is an interesting choice, though, right? Because they are effectively just humans like the rest of us, and Andy has been around for 6,000 years. Like, she can't figure out how a cell phone works. Like, even like a flip phone, like a simple flip phone, like that she has trouble with. And it is an odd decision in a story. Like, she can figure out how guns work, but she can't figure out how an iPad works.
Exactly. Like, you look at the scenes, both in the movie and the comic, where they have the stockpiles, is what I think about. And you're seeing tanks, motorcycles, billions of different weapons. I'm like, so you figured that out, but you can't figure out a modern phone or a laptop. I don't buy it.
You still have an AOL account, don't you?
Wendy?
It's not just the not figuring it out part that bothers me. It's the fact that they're so keen on we can't be caught.
Yeah.
Yet the biggest way that they could be caught, she has no clue about. Like, she should have burner phones, like, all this stuff. So she should have been on top of that, and it was definitely a very cheap trope that the writer used here to give Booker and Niall that plot point, and I did not appreciate it at all.
And I'm glad it doesn't really carry over into the movie.
No, they almost purposely said, no, Andy's fine with technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can we talk about another thing that they didn't carry over from the comic into the movie that I'm very, very happy they didn't?
No, not yet.
Oh, fine. Yes, ma'am.
We do have a couple questions from the audience that are regarding the films. Maybe we'll go to those.
I guess you could do that.
Be nice, Jen. The audience is lovely, and they all deserve Nobel Prizes for being awesome. So Liz asks a question regarding the samples in the lab after they've defeated the lab and killed like 300 mercenaries with their bare hands. And Liz asks, was anyone else surprised that they didn't take any efforts to destroy the samples taken from them or the lab computers? And Liz was saying they expected like the lab would blow up.
They address this in the comic, don't they? Because one of the things I love about the sequence where Nick and Joe are being examined is how absolutely nonplussed they are by the entire process. There's like, this again? Okay, here we go. And in the comic, they make it clear, they don't as much in the movie, that it is not a genetic thing. That, samples, blood, genetics, DNA, none of that is actually what is driving the immortality, and therefore evil tech bro trying to turn them into Cuisinart juice to drink is not going to make him immortal.
Immortal smoothie.
They do a lot more with that. They make that a lot more... I really grossed out Sean, I'm sorry. They make that a lot more explicit in the comic, that the samples and the biology are not the driver. So because that is a consistent thread between the two presentations, it didn't surprise me that the lab didn't blow up at the end.
I agree. And I think they actually do make it pretty clear that that's not a thing that they can do when I think it's Nikki says that's not how any of this works.
Yeah, exactly.
Like whatever. Also, one of my favorite lines in the film is actually when Nikki says, "Joe, there's a TV."
On the plane, yeah! Oh, there's a TV on the plane! I love it.
Like, oh, is there champagne? Like, those two are just the most wonderful characters in the entire world.
So are we gonna talk about the scene now?
I suppose we can talk about the scene, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later too. But so let's talk about it just in terms of the film and its place within the film. Who wants to go first? Talk about the best thing.
Are we talking about the meet cute, or are we talking about the like romance speech?
Oh, I love their meet cute.
Wendy put her hand up first. Let Wendy go
yes.
first.
I'm putting my hand up first because I want to get it in there that I really didn't like it. So,
Wendy.
Controversy, go!
I don't. Do you want me to just leave now and then I leave?
No.
We get to yell at you now.
I loved the concept of it. The actors weren't strong enough in their delivery, and that was my disappointment. So I was really pleased when I read the comic to see that was in there and that they did this huge thing. But when I was watching the movie, I'm like, oh, at least it's not Sand and Anakin, and so it was just like a little bit above the sand. Sorry.
Well, that's one of the things we should talk about with the scene. The fact that the two that they got to play these gay characters are not
gay.
And yet we have Stamets and I always forget his name.
Colbert
in Discovery. Two gay actors, two gay romance characters. It's not impossible to do. So I share a lot of Wendy's kind of like, this was so important. I mean, the director and the writer who I think did the screenplay, everybody was on record as saying, you cut this scene, you don't do this movie. And they delivered on it. And yet I think Wendy's absolutely right. The emotion of it was second fiddle to the placement of it, which is really, 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 which is why I need my 60K slow burn origin story.
Absolutely. Wendy?
Yeah, I didn't buy their relationship. So when that speech came up, I'm like, oh, they're a couple. Neat. Okay. So yeah, I didn't, like, the comic had such beautiful little beats, so many panels with them just sleeping together. And I don't mean sex, they're just cuddled together. Didn't get any of those beats. Even, the way they came together with their deaths, the movie let me down on that one. So I felt that's why I kind of like the Quinn story, because I felt that connection, but I didn't feel it with Nikki and Joe, and that was really disappointing for me.
That's really interesting because I bought their relationship outside of that speech, because I actually do agree, like, unfortunately, and I love the actor who played Joe. I can't remember his name right now because I don't remember things like that. I love him separate from this, and I think he actually plays, isn't he in American Gods? Now I can't remember.
It's Marwan Kenzari, who was Jafar in Aladdin.
Yes, and...
Oh, was he?
Yes, he was.
I might actually watch that. Cause
Yeah. He was the
super
sexy
hot.
Jafar.
So, I have a crush on him.
It's true. That's why I didn't believe him as Jafar. He's too cute.
He is pretty hot.
Jafar is like gotta have evil look. He's gotta look like he would like try to sell you something on a weekend.
Yeah, but now I can ship myself with Jafar, and I'm not totally against that. Anyway, he was unfortunately kind of weak in his delivery. What I found interesting though is I actually loved kind of the ease with which the two of them interacted with each other the rest of the time. So, like, even though I didn't get that sort of passion that I really would have wanted in that scene particularly, I love that they, like, I disagree with Wendy in this point. I think I did get those beats of, aside from the passion, just their comfort with each other and their reliance on each other.
They act like an old married couple. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's just some very tiny, subtle, like, nods at each other that happen that are, like, seeded throughout the movie that I really love to watch. And so I did get that part of it. But yes, that speech is just, it's one of the most, like, romantic speeches in the history of speeches. And unfortunately, in the film, I didn't feel like the burning heat that I would have loved to. So yeah, I agree. We need fanfic. I'm gonna be popping over on AO3 maybe. So, Wendy?
So that was my thing. Like, I totally got that they were together, and there was definitely a relationship, but that was a very much, you should write the fanfic about it. In the comic, it was, we've already got the fanfic, here you go. So that, I just needed more in the show.
That's interesting. I like that. Sean, are you watching the chat? Do we have any more questions?
We do have other questions, yeah. So we had one from RJK2063, which I assume is code word for I'm an immortal, please don't find me. So they asked, is there something of a Highlander element here that you have to die of violence to become an immortal, or is the sample size too small to be sure?
Alistair, you want to tackle that?
There's an interesting hint about that and about where the series could be going in the second volume, which I know we're not quite at yet, but...
What's the title of the
second volume is Force Multiplied. The final issue of it came out a couple of weeks ago. But an element of it is actually present in the movie, which is the research that Copley does, and proves that the people they've saved have had direct, provable impacts on human history as time has gone on. I wonder whether what the series as a whole is building towards is the idea that if there is no biological component, and we're pretty certain there isn't, these people are a sculpting tool of history, that a set amount of them become immortal over time, and the work they do either damages history or steers it towards something ultimately more positive.
I'm sorry, the 18 theme just went through my head while you were talking.
If you need help.
And if you can find it.
It's a great question, and I think it's really early days for it. And I think when the third and final volume, Fade Away, starts in about a year's time, as I understand it, we will be getting those answers.
There was a comment in the chat about, although the sample size is very small, all the immortals we see appear to have been soldiers.
Which is a really smart spot. Can you imagine being one of these people when you died falling off a ladder? And you're just like, I know ladders. I know ladders and carpentry. I'm really good at that. Please stop giving me a gun.
Just like, no, I don't tell my origin story.
That conversation's gotta suck when the others find you and they're like, so what can you do? And he's like, eh. And he puts the ladder up and he's like, that's me. And over there going, okay, this is gonna be like 300 years of training before we can even use you.
An immortal pastry chef. Exactly, Zalia. Well done. Well done.
At least the chef's useful.
But why does everyone have to be trained with weapons? Yes,
exactly.
Definitely give us that pastry chef. I want like a whole community of immortals who can do stuff. And the old guard can go fight.
Right, exactly. They have their purpose in that shaping history. Like, this kind of brings me to the idea of, like, what if Copley in the movie version ended up as an immortal? Because he clearly has incredibly useful skills to the team. Like, I don't see it happening in the sequel. He's not going to become immortal. But, like, just kind of the concept of people like that.
The guy in the chair.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's a related question from Marion about Booker, about whether Booker's hung for desertion, so he didn't die technically from violence, and I guess in this case violence in the sense of like being stabbed or shot or something. I guess I would argue obviously being hung is pretty freaking violent, but I think that the difference is that the others, because with Nikki and Joe. They meet in the Crusades, and I can't recall if the film really gives us much to go on, but in the comics, it's a little bit, yeah. In the comics, they like have a whole spread shot of them basically murdering each other over and over, and then they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go cuddle now."
See, that's the fanfic I need.
Right. Well, I mean, this is the meet cute, right? Like that. Their murder husbandy
It's a
stuff.
beat cute. It's not a meet cute.
It's a beat cute, yeah.
A beat cute.
A murder cute, you know.
It's a murder cute, yeah. I think Marion's getting at the idea that the soldierness is clear for all of the characters. They all are in some degree warriors of some kind. That does seem that it doesn't really matter how they discover they're immortals. Their deaths aren't, as like what Alistair was saying, something as like accidental. It seems to be deliberate violence done against their person by theoretically someone else. So like nobody's becoming one because they got in a car accident, right? It's
Not
always
yet.
like not yet, right? Yeah, but so far it's being hung, it's being shot, stabbed. Those kinds of things are the things that do it. So it is violence, but it's like murderous violence, I guess would be the best way to think about it.
Or maybe intentional violence. We don't know. If the theory that Alistair's talking about, that they are unwitting pawns of the force of history, then somehow their deaths may therefore need to take place at pivotal historical moments. So perhaps the fact that the incidents that they are involved with are pivotal to history, and that those things tend to correspond with violent conflict, it's more of an effect than a cause. But we don't. I think the other comment in the chat is very accurate. We don't have a pretty big enough sample size to really know what we're working with here.
And I really wonder whether that's something that's being hidden in plain sight. I really do. It's in terms of narrative escalation, it makes a ton of sense because my understanding is the series is going to be a trilogy of graphic novels, where when the third series rolls out, Raka goes, "Oh yeah, meet this lot as well." That perhaps they operate in groups of 5.
Yeah, maybe there's like another team on the side of evil too. You know,
Those are the latter guys in the pastry chefs.
Yes. Fantastic cronuts and murder.
Cronuts and murder.
Okay, so originally on our script that Sean so nicely wrote, because he's a lovely
That we've
human being.
completely ignored.
So this is the part where we thought we would kind of give final thoughts on the movie and our grades, as is usual for our movie podcasts. And then we'll move into very specifically some questions about the comic book adaptation aspect of the Old Guard. So final thoughts and grades. Alistair.
Final grade is a straight A. This is intelligent and unusual. It's an action movie which actually has an emotional heart. And I really think we can't overstate the importance of the romance speech being on screen. Because really on 2 levels, and I will climb on 2 soapboxes simultaneously here, and balanced. Gay representation in action movies isn't. It just, by and large, isn't outside the lighting in every John Wick movie. And, an Atomic Blonde. And to see a gay couple who are both happily a couple and able to murder you 18,000 different ways in a movie like this is subversive and brilliant in the best possible way. And also, the emotional element of it. Emotional suppression kills people. It kills people that men who have suppressed their emotions lash out at, and it kills men. It is an incredible act of faith to accept, as a guy, that you have emotional responses to things. That scene made me fucking cry. Because it's beautiful and honest and sincere. And a movie like this, and let's be real, action movies are one of the widest appeal genres. Doing something like that, I can't imagine the number of guys who saw that and went, oh God, it's okay. It's okay to feel things. Badasses feel things. And I know I'm phrasing this in a manner which is very lighthearted, but that's going to save lives, potentially. And more importantly, arguably, it's going to move the window of what's acceptable masculine behaviour in areas which think Joe Rogan is acceptable masculine behaviour into something far healthier. Off the soapboxes, I really liked it. Would recommend. We'll watch again.
Marguerite.
I'm going to go actually with an A-. And the reason it's an A- is I think a lot of the kind of elements that we've touched on here today, the fact that yes, we have a gay representation, but we don't have gay acting. Yes, we have a centered Black female actress, but we also have a literally fridged woman of color character. I think we're almost there, and I'm giving it the minus because I want it to get pissed off and aspire to do better.
What you're saying is if you're not honest with it, it can't improve.
Yes, I am.
Okay, good.
Wendy.
I'm teetering between a B+ and an A-, which is pretty much the same thing. So we'll say A-, so it sounds a little better. My trouble was with the actors, mainly the guys, because Nikki, Booker, and Joe, they weren't as strong as the others, so I felt that brought it down a little, especially in that particular scene that I should have loved, but the action was incredible. I love that there was so much depth to the emotion and the relationships, and it just shows what an action movie should be, especially coming from comic books, because there is still that impression that even superhero comic books can't have that kind of emotion, or movies can't have that kind of emotion, but we've already seen with Logan, there's so much depth in those comics that we're reading, and there are so many different kinds of comics, and to see all that on the screen and know that so many different people are watching that now, even whether or not they realize it's coming from comics, it's just comics. I love it. I'm just happy.
I mean, you're on Women Write About Comics
Yes.
for a reason, I feel. That makes sense. Sean, what about you?
Well, I would also go with an A-. I think for me, this film's a lot of fun to watch. And I definitely want to go back and see all of there's just really great action sequences. I definitely want to see for the future, especially the I'm putting a shotgun on the ground at an angle and then throwing your face towards it so that you get your face blown off move. I don't know what that's called, but that is a really cool way to kill somebody. So yeah. But yeah, so I really enjoyed it. I will just say that we didn't talk about the tech bro basically at all. And that tech bro is played by Harry Melling, who most people will know as Dudley Dursley. Only now he's all grown up and yet still is playing characters that are vile and horrible and also is really good at it. And he does a pretty good job here. I believe that he ran a hedge fund and then started trying to collect immortal people blood via very unethical means. Very much buy it.
He golfs with Musk, doesn't he? You buy it, you know.
He does. He pulls it off. He definitely spent a couple weeks. I think I think he's method acting here. He was hanging out with Musk and Bezos and Zuckerberg, and he just hung out there. You know where he went? I know where he went. That little place in California where they started collecting young people blood to give to older people as injections. And by older people, I mean older rich white people. Yeah. That's a real thing. I'm not just making that up.
The facts that you know very specifically are disturbing. I'm just letting you know that.
I'm interested in stuff.
Okay, so I'm just going to parrot literally what everybody else said. This was a wonderful film. I do think that the male actors were a little bit weaker, but I think in a way some of them are much newer to sort of big pictures. So that might be part of it in terms of their comfort of what they were doing. But again, we have Kiki Lane, who, oh my God. And I found it interesting that Kiki, she's coming from a dramatic background, which I think really added to how powerful she was on the screen. But, you really cannot just dismiss or diminish the amount of training she must have gone through because she does not have an action background. And oh my God. I just want to say really quickly, the editing of this film was brilliant. I think Gina Blythe, is it Davies? The director obviously was handed a piece of work and went with it beautifully. I'm really excited that this was a Netflix film, and the sort of opportunity that gives a blockbuster to get to a wider audience. And I found it interesting because usually my relationship to action films is like, I want to see it on the big screen because explosions and stuff and sound and all of those things. But this was really interesting because the action scenes, and I think it has something to do with, the direction very specifically, the action actually seemed very intimate.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the squad level, yeah.
Exactly. And I really, really appreciated that aspect of the final production. So I'm going to give it an A. I loved it. I loved seeing Charlize kick ass always because she's amazing. And now I have to go watch Fury Road again. And then I'm going to watch this like 3 or 4 more times because that's me.
And Atomic Blonde.
Yep.
Oh my God.
We double billed them. That was a really good combo.
Oh,
Nice. Good call.
And that one is so gay, and I so appreciate
That's
it.
Always love to see James McAvoy chewing a bad guy. It's great.
I do think that Theron is a bit more refined in the action here in this film compared to Atomic Blonde. It's a little rougher, and I just think that it's all kind of settled in here in a way that it hadn't quite with Atomic Blonde. They're both good, but...
I'm just wondering if that's an intentional choice, because the character in Atomic Blonde is very much about anger in the moment and speed, whereas with Andy, we literally have centuries of refinement and economy of movement, and that presents a little differently.
That's a fair point, very possible. So, well, okay. We're going to switch over. By the way, the director is actually Gina Prince Bythewood, or Bythewood, depending on how you pronounce that. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Gina Prince Bythewood. Okay, sorry. I knew it was Gina. I'm a bad names person. Very bad.
It is a Gina, yeah, but I think you confused Gina Davis with the director, which I don't think the director would be totally against because Gina Davis is pretty cool, but...
I did not, absolutely did not. I said Gina Bythe Davies, and that...
Yeah, you're leaning in. It's okay,
Just
Jen.
shut up. Can we talk
It's fine.
about this as a comic book adaptation now? I would appreciate it.
Sure.
So, first off, I want to hear from everybody. What did you think of this film, very specifically, as a comic book adaptation? How successful was it in the end? And not just as a film, obviously we've just talked about it as successful as a film, but how successful is it as an adaptation? And I'll go to you, Wendy.
I think it was very, very successful, and I understand that Greg Rucka did he write the whole? Yeah, okay. So, and I love to see that because it's an opportunity for him to revisit and say, okay, this didn't work in the comic, and this is how I want it to, this is what I wanted now that I've read that. So I really love the things he leaned into, like, he got away from, like, her whole, Andy's whole, sexual relationships and exhaustion with all that, and just focused on a whole bunch of other things, like the technology. He solved that problem. I think he leaned into the things that really needed to, not just because they would play better on screen, but because they perhaps didn't work as well in the comic. And so I'd be interesting. I haven't read the second volume. I'd be interested to see how this experience has shaped things for him as he writes on.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point that I had not thought of before. Marguerite, how about you?
I think it kind of breaks the mold in terms of comic adaptations, because at least Western audiences, when you say comic book movie, you think spandex and superheroes. And that brings a lot of expectation and baggage with it. And to take a contemporary set piece and not to break that. I mean, there's no breaking the wall about this is set in the modern day. But to bring it in, exemplify, but not fall back on the tropes of it being grounded in so much history is completely different than what we come to expect when we think of comic book movie. Again, probably in a modern Western sense, and you can blame Marvel for that because it's entirely their fault.
Yeah, I would agree with everything that's been said, and zeroing on one thing in particular. The art in the comic is done by an artist called Leandro Fernandez, and Fernandez has a very specific and, in many cases, very good style. But he also has a style which is designed, I suspect, to appeal to a very particular type of comic reader. And
how many nipple shots are there?
There's about 4 in the first 10 pages.
We'll get to that.
Yes.
No, I'm being good, but I want to talk about that.
But by swapping out Andy using sex to kill the pain for food, not only do we sidestep the here is gratuitous nudity, which I'm really glad we didn't get, but he also focuses in on the character more. The idea that Andy uses food as a source of memory, that she has travelled everywhere and eaten everything so many times, that she can identify individual ingredients is such a lovely grace note, and it gives you far more a visceral sense of just how long these people have been alive.
But it's still sensual. And that's what's so important
Yes.
about it for me, is it is still a sensual experience that she's using to ground herself through history. They're not denying her emotional or sensual experience. They're not making her a bookworm or an art collector. They're giving her some other form of physical memory and manifestation, but they're updating it to be something that isn't so male gaze and gratuitous. I really loved that note. I thought that was, and the fact that the rest of her team bet on it. They're like, we've obviously done this before. Place your bets to see whether or not she can guess it or not. It's such a really smart way to update, not even to modernize, but to, that takes a lot of self-knowledge to look at a text you've written only, 3-4 years ago and go, okay, this is where I'm starting, but, is this the presentation? Is this the way I want to convey that aspect of this character? Not just because we are moving to a different medium, but because we are modernizing and our approach to our audience, and we're not making the same kind of consumption assumptions. And that takes a lot of really self-knowledge. I think Wendy's point and Jen's point earlier about it will be fascinating to see what the third arc of the comic is now that we've had the movie in the middle, and how they will play upon each other.
Absolutely. Sean, do you have anything to add?
A kitty!
Other than a kitty?
Yeah, I'm going to try, but, this is the consequence of doing a virtual Oh, he's done. Perfect. Perfect timing. So a couple of things that I thought was really interesting in going to the comic after watching the film was realizing in a, really immediate way which aspects they just did basically shot for shot from the comic. I thought that the choices they made of the shot-by-shots were really perfect. Because the opening shot is almost exactly shot for shot the same. It makes some small adjustments, like certain characters speak certain things that don't in the comics. There's a really great shot in the film of the shoes, which they kind of comment on, which isn't in the comic. But this opening shot is a shot for shot from the comic, and it's really well done. But when they do make changes, I think the changes mostly are enhance the story in a way that I think they work fine in the comic, but I don't know how you do some of that in a film. I think in film, especially when you're trying to adapt to a visual medium that is static, like a comic book, comic books can sort of do a lot of shorthand where they can throw in pieces of information and you're supposed to fill in a lot of gaps automatically. But films can't do that. They can't just here's a flashback, and we're not going to tell you anything about it. It's just going to be a conquistador, and he's going to run around and eat a banana, and you just have to figure out what that's about. That would become surrealism. But comics can kind of do this. They can kind of give you bits with little dialogue boxes, and it's very quick, and it doesn't take a lot of pages. This doesn't do that. Instead, what they do is they say, these shots are really good. We're going to repeat these almost verbatim, but then these sequences we're going to adjust, and we're going to add little bits to, because we want these things to hold in a way that they wouldn't work necessarily in the comic. So overall, I would say successful. It's a pretty successful adaptation, I think.
Yeah, I was very surprised by how directly it was transposed from the comic. And even I was actually impressed that the characters, despite Leandro's art style, actually did resemble their comic book counterparts. So I was like, how did you manage this? Sort of. It's obviously a very exaggerated art style, which, you can't really translate that sort of comic booky features to the screen exactly. That would be weird. But I still was very impressed by it. So one of the things though is that obviously there are some really big changes. And then there are some really small changes. So like Marguerite said, in terms of Andy identifying the food and that being the way that you contextualize her in terms of her experience and her history. In the comic book, very subtle difference here. It's Andy that identifies the knife that is used to kill Niall. In the film, it's Nikki. So that very subtle difference obviously indicates a lot about how they're positioning Andy in the comic book versus in the movie. So let's kind of like talk about, to you, what is the biggest change between the comic book and the movie? Was it successful to you or not? Let's kind of go through a couple of those. Feel free to bring up different ones or discuss the same ones. And oh my God, Sean, stop raising your hand. It's driving me crazy. I see you. Please go.
That's your punishment.
The worst. Never doing live again.
I'll go to the big one for me, which would be the sequence with Quinn, which is completely different between the comic. It is on a boat, but in the comic, it's much more intimate for Andy because the implication is they're in a relationship of sorts. And when she is lost at sea, she's literally lost. Like a wave comes in while Andy is trapped on the boat and sucks her into the sea. And so there's a bit more of a finality to it of like, she even says in the comic, right, that, when you're immortal, not a lot really scares you except the sea. The sea is the one thing that terrifies immortals. Yeah.
Point. Is that in the first volume or the second volume?
Excuse me, second volume, because somebody did their darn homework.
Okay, but I'm just talking about the first volume right now, because that's what the movie is adapted from. Thank you very much, sir.
It's not. Nope.
Sorta.
Nope. The first
Okay,
three issues of the second volume are all of the sequences with Quinn in the film.
Except the Iron Maiden?
She is not present. She is mentioned in the first 5, but she is not present. In fact, the end sequence that's in the title credits of the film is the opening sequence of the first comic of the second volume.
Okay. I mean, that's fine. I just wanted to clarify for people that this information about the relationship between Quinn and, like I said, in the comic book, she's Noriko. She's of Japanese descent. And they changed that for the film into Quinn because the actress Valerie?
Van Veronica Ngo. Yeah.
Veronica. Valerie, Veronica.
She's Vietnamese, yeah.
She's Vietnamese, so they respected that and they changed her ethnicity in the film, which was actually, I think, a really cool thing to do overall. But yeah, I just wanted to clarify that.
So the point is, this is in the film, so it's actually pulling bits from both. So my guess is if we get a sequel, it's actually going to be the content of Volume 2 and what would be in Volume 3. Because so much of Volume 2 is actually in this film. It's just different, right? So like the Iron Maiden sequence, that's not in the comics. But I think in this, it works because it's supposed to heighten the tension in the film. In the comics, they want the sequence when she's lost to feel much more final. That when she's lost at sea, it's like there's nothing to be done. The sea is the thing that terrifies the immortals the most because it's the thing they can't control. Right? There's no, the ocean comes in, it sucks you in, you can't swim, that's it. Like, James Cameron doesn't exist yet. He can't find the Titanic for you. So
neither do the aliens in the abyss, sadly.
Sure. Yeah. So that for me, I think it really works in the film in a way that I don't know if you could have it the same way as you have in the comic. I think they need it to be a little bit more terrifying in the film than it is in the comic. I think the comic, you need that being much more personal because that's what the second volume is really about. It's about Andy's personal struggles with immortality. Whereas in the film, it is more about the terror and the threat of what humanity can do to people. And what they do to Quinn is a pretty big deal. It's not minor.
So that brings up a very good point. If the second volume is about Andy dealing with her immortality and a potentially large change, Sean, you'll have to correct me or not, is that in the film she loses her immortality. So, Alistair and Marguerite, if you can kind of tell us about that shift.
Well, it's definitely not in the first volume of comics.
Or the second.
Right.
Or the second.
Mm-hmm.
So that is an entirely new element that's been added to the movie.
I think it's perhaps one of the places where you could argue the movie stumbles a little bit. Simply because it does fluff the damage that she takes quite badly in that last scene. She is all kinds of messed up coming out of Dursley Industries head offices. And you know it's true. You know it. Then during the scene in, I believe, the oldest Bayside pub in the UK, where they're discussing what to do with Booker, she's moving like someone who has worked out heavily, but not someone with holes in them. So I would not be at all surprised if in the second movie we get a thing of it's without a traumatic, permanent instant injury like we see Lycan have in the flashback. I wonder whether when your immortality is done, it's like the volume being turned down. You are okay for a while, and hard to kill, and a little less hard to kill, and a little less hard to kill, and at a key moment you become mortal.
I don't know if I personally buy that, because the other immortal deaths that we see in flashbacks are very abrupt. And so I think, again, this may be kind of the place where the movie falls down, is if her immortality is fading, not so much as ends. The obvious question becomes why? What's different about Andy that causes this to happen? I mean, age is the number one question. As far as we know, Andy has always been positioned as the original immortal, the first. She's 6,300 some odd years old. I would love it if we found out she was not the first, and why, and all of that good stuff. But I don't know. I think it's a situation where we don't know enough. And I also think we could kind of make the assumption that Hollywood likes to shoot people lots and not kill them. So maybe they just needed to mess her up enough to make it the point, but not to actually kill her before the end of the movie. I don't know.
I will say that the one point before I go to Wendy is that, as Sean mentioned earlier, Andromache is not exactly a reliable narrator in this whole situation. So how much of that is playing into our perceptions of how slow or fast the decline, if there is a decline, actually is for the immortals? And now I'll let Wendy go.
I think we have a number of clues from the movie regarding her immortality. The new people, it takes a little while longer, whatever. So, that could factor in. Maybe there's some sort of reset. But the damage that she takes is huge. But the adrenaline is a huge thing. Yeah. So I'm not writing off how much she could have done with just by sheer will. I mean, this is a 6,000-year-old woman who has lived through things. And again, they did show how much pain it is, whether or not she knows she's coming back. They've had to, walk on broken legs, whatever. So I'm fine with that. I think it's simply a logistics thing. They worked really hard to make Niall her equal and almost a leader. And Charlize isn't necessarily going to be here for the next movie. I think that's the simple answer, which kind of takes us out of the bubble. But I think that's a very logical, simple answer.
I think that's a really excellent point. And when you made it, I completely blanked on the follow-up question that I had.
Sorry.
It's okay. That was just I was like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Sean, you wanted to say something?
Sure. I guess I'll kind of bounce off this about one of the things that Nikki, I believe it's Nikki, does in both the comics and the film is kind of remind us that your time just kind of comes up. And you don't really have a choice. It's either Nikki or Joe that says this. I can't remember. And it's said in the doctor sequence when they're basically being stabbed and stuff being pulled out of them, and they're not using any kind of anesthesia or anything to help them. So it's pretty brutal. And he says you're not going to find the answer in us because it doesn't really exist, right? It's something beyond physical. It's beyond DNA, but also we're not really immortal. We do die. It's just we're just waiting on the time when we die, right? And it's just weird that we happen to be getting more than everybody else, right? The Dursley is going to die. Well, he dies in this, so he was probably going to die at like 32, though, because for sure he was just going to get run over by a Ferrari at some point. But like the idea is like for everybody else, death comes in, your 70 to 80 years of life, but for immortals, for some reason, death like waits. Right, you get a little bit more time, but eventually it comes for you. Time is like the one thing you can't escape. Time doesn't care about any of your motivations or desires. Like eventually death comes, time ends for you, you get it. Which is why I think when Marguerite was talking about the suddenness, in the comics it's the same, right? That some of the characters that are previous immortals, they're in a battle one day and they get cut down and then it's like, oh, death, sweet, delicious death. And then they go, and die. To be fair, if you've lived for 6,000 years, like at some point, like death starts to seem like a fun adventure.
So that's actually, talking about time, it reminded me of one of Andy's quotes in the film, and I can't remember if it's in the comic book or not, or how much of this is in the comic book, but she says that time takes everything away, but it's what is left behind by time that's the important part, and in her case, it's the bad memories. And I can't remember, like, I don't know how much that actually plays into either one inevitably, like how successfully either one actually displays that idea, except obviously with Booker very specifically, who, and maybe it's just because he's the youngest, is still very much dwelling in his memories. And obviously that emotional beat is much stronger, I think, in the film than it is in the comic book. So Alistair, since you kind of talked about that during your closing thoughts on the film, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that whole idea of kind of the internalization of emotional travel is something which I find really interesting in the way that it's handled here, and it also kind of cross references with with one of the things that's just come up in the chat, which is the idea that the immortality is faith based. That there are a couple of points where Andy says out loud that she's done. So she is. And that the possibility that she is more durable at the end could be explained by her being less done than she thinks she is. And, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And it's something which could explain why Booker is like he is. He has absolute faith in the fact he failed his family. And I would go for it.
But then why isn't Booker dead? Why hasn't Booker lost his immortality if he's lost
he
faith?
Doesn't think he deserves to.
Oh, wow. Guilt. It gets us all.
I'm fairly certain he's a good Catholic boy.
Yeah, okay.
And guilt is the fuel that we run on. So, as Dylan Moran once put it, look at these lovely biscuits. I ate all of them. They're delicious. I feel terrible. And that's kind of where Booker is,
That's a really good point. And I mean, he did betray them, but it's almost for good reasons. One of the big changes that I liked from the comic book was that Copley he was more of a sympathetic villain, and he had the background, and he had, why are you keeping this from the world when you could save more people? And I think that is excellent motivation for Booker. So, I didn't get that Booker wanted to die, because he has all that guilt, so he wants to do something. He wants to use their powers in some way, and so that's what I got out of him and about Copley, and which kind of balanced the just evil bad guy sort of thing.
Yeah, because, Merrick is not exactly a nuanced villain by any stretch of the imagination.
But I like how updated he was, because in the comic, he looks like a prison reject who he's doing push-ups, and he's covered in tattoos, and he's wearing, what looks like an orange jumpsuit tied around his waist. And here we have an updated, modern, smarmy villain. A Brit in tweed, in obviously Heron Tower, looking down his nose at everyone before he hides in his bathroom. That is another one of those nice modernized moments. It's like, oh no, we know you. You are a corporate bastard, and of course none of us trust you.
I will say, I did miss the bathtub being an aspect of him cowering in his bathtub because he's so afraid of facing, his terribleness and them, because they are so terrifying.
It's interesting because in the comic, Marguerite's kind of right that it's sort of this like gruff, like he used to be in the punk movement but then became corporate, and so he's just like he's just got like the hair and he's like a jerk, but he's also kind of terrifying in the comic because there's this moment when he basically just stabs Nikki and Joe, and he's just like, "Ah," and he's just going off and yelling and just like in a rage. And it's sort of this moment where it's like, oh, well, this guy's like, he is powerful physically, right? He is a potential not literally a physical threat because he can't actually kill them, but he can't harm them in terms of physical harm. But you get a reversal because at the end of in the comic, he's in the bathtub cowering like a coward. But in the film, right, he's this sort of skinny, he's not very physically imposing. He sort of is imposing in terms of his language and the rhetoric, but he's not physically imposing. He's not going in. He does stab them at one point, but it's not a big deal, right? It's not a kind of, I'm gonna do this, but at the end, right, we see him pick up her axe as though he's going to become the big aggressive guy, and it kind of falls apart. And so there's a bit more in the character of, in the comic, he is a character that is trying very hard to live out this harsh, ruthless character. And in the film, it's one that is kind of failing at it because he's less threatening. He is a guy who looks like he got bullied, who thinks he can be the bully now because he can hire mercenaries.
I actually like that update.
I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying that's the difference.
Yeah, there is a difference, but I will say, I think he is terrifying because, I mean, like, to an extent, he is terrifying because of what he represents, which is money and power and the ability to track these people down no matter where they go or what they do, because he can just pour all the fucking money in the world at it. That was too, sorry. And destroy them and their lives, not like their actual like heart beating lives, but their existences if he so chooses to. And he's a sadistic bastard. Like, you get that in the comic book, but in the comic book, it's more of like an expression of just like rage and physicality. In this, it's a ruthlessness born of, I give no fucks about who you are. I am going to destroy everything.
In the comic, he's a psychopath. In the movie, he's a sociopath.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's a really crucial difference. And I love it as an update in the context of capitalism. So like, that to me was actually really, really fun. Wendy?
Can I pop back just a little bit to the, there were some comments about the nudity in the comic book.
Yes.
So I just want to comment on that. I have no issues with the nudity in the comic book. It was all contextual and perfect. I liked the fact that they shifted away from sex being her go-to for the movie, and I loved the way they gave her that sensuality with the food instead, because he used a lot of tropes in the comic, and so I'm glad he moved away from that for the movie. But Greg Rucka is a comic book writer that I really love and respect for the way he writes women in particular. So I can trust him to be working with an artist who, if there's going to be a nipple, it's not going to be a male gaze nipple. So, yeah. And there's a penis in there too. So, hey, equal.
Yeah.
So.
I appreciated that. Really quickly, Wendy, because this was something you brought up before the show, you wanted to talk about, and obviously I know Marguerite's answer on this, so whatever, Marguerite. But you mentioned sort of the importance of Andy as an older woman, and you kind of mentioned that while we were talking about the film, but let's talk about that in the context of comic books and how important that is just in the comic book world, and to see it as an adaptation. But also, and we know Marguerite's answer to this question, but you can share it, Marguerite, because not everybody who is watching knows, I guess. Who is another older woman comic book hero that you would love to see adapted on the big screen? And Wendy, I'll let you go first.
I recently read Velvet. Sorry, you put me on the spot, so I don't know who it's by or whatever, but she's like an assassin spy who who is kind of out of the business, but she's uncovered all this kind of stuff and is having to deal with it all. But she's definitely an older woman. She uses sex. She uses whatever she's got in her arsenal, and it's just stunning to see her work. So I would love to see that in the big screen. So, and I feel like Charlize is kind of going through all of these comic books to find those things. So hope she'll get that one.
I just looked it up, and it's an Ed Brubaker, and oh my god, that white streak of hair!
Yeah, it is
I am
such a good
here
book.
for this!
You want to go next?
Alistair.
Oh no, I'm not going next.
No. I'm behaving. You can go next.
No! We're gonna have Marguerite go last so she can scream to the world.
I have a slightly unusual one. Lady Joanna Constantine, who is a side character in The Sandman, and an ancestor of John Constantine, and did just terrible things for the English crown for a wide variety of good reasons. And she is a gift of a character and a gift of a role. And I would love, especially in the wake of Legends of Tomorrow, and just how well they've done by Constantine as a character, to see her show up somewhere.
Oh my god, that would be amazing. I would be cool with that in Legends of Tomorrow. All right, Sean, I'm going to let you go first, but I'm going to make Marguerite wait.
The only one I could think of that, because I was going to say Saga, but she's not older in that. She's definitely quite young. Storm would be really nice.
Cheater.
That's not a cheat. Storm is badass. I would love to be able to control the weather. And also, like, I just feel like you could actually do the character right in post-2020 in a way that maybe they just could not quite do. Like, Halle Berry's great, but, like, they didn't really give Halle Berry anything to really work with for Storm, which I think is just unfortunate. And I would just love to see the character done as Storm, not Storm as a member of a team of a bunch of men who will get more screen time.
So it is actually a totally valid thing to say Storm, because I think we keep seeing her as a younger woman in the adaptations of the X-Men.
Right.
And I still want Angela Bassett to play Storm. There are obviously so many actresses out there that would be incredible to play Storm on the big
Queen
screen.
Latifah.
Oh, hell.
Oh my god. Okay, but that said, I have had it in my heart since day one, since I saw Strange Days, so many years ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That Angela Bassett would make the perfect Storm. And I really would love to see a mature Storm on the big screen, because obviously the progression of Storm as a character over the decades in the comic books, like, I love her old wise self. I also love her younger self, and I love her in the punk years. I love Storm. Alistair?
I was just setting things up for Marguerite.
Thank you for the assist.
It is Marguerite's turn. Marguerite, who do you want to see?
I want Jen Walters on the big screen. I want She-Hulk. And there are so many fantastic portrayals of her, especially some of the later ones where she's literally dealing with being trapped in Hulk form emotionally and how she copes with the anger. But she's a professional woman as well as being a superhero. I will always love Single Green Female, the novel by Marta Costa, I think it is, which specifically talks, I mean, it is kind of a rom-com sort of book, but it's fabulous because it's how do you be a professional woman and date and a superhero and, you know, deal with modern pressures and situations. And, you know, the fighting the bad guy part is the easy part. It's the time management of everything else that's the challenge that I would really like to see. And I'd like to see her kick Tony's butt.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, we have literally 2 minutes left. We actually managed to fill an hour and 50 minutes.
Woohoo!
Which we thought was going to be a challenge, but I didn't think was going to be a challenge because we're all a little bit chatty around here. So, really quickly, we've dropped links into the chat, but if you guys can give us like your main link really quick, and then we'll close this out. Wendy?
WomenWriteAboutComics.com.
Fantastic. Marguerite and Alistair?
EscapeArtists.net and AlistairStewart.com.
Fantastic. And congratulations again, both of you, on being finalists for everything, especially the fan writer, for you, Alistair. And Sean, I think it's time.
Are we closing? Are we ending the show?
I think we need to.
Okay, so that means that I am allowed to take my pants off after this, right? And
You
like wander my house and
absolutely
okay.
100% are.
Perfect.
It would be even better if you could do this on screen and just stand up without pants on.
No,
and that
because
would definitely be an awkward ending.
I would get kicked out, and also Wendy will never come on this show again because she will hate me with a fiery passion. Alistair's fine with it. It's all good. But the one benefit of Virtual Worldcon is at no point are you required to wear pants for anything.
Okay, I guess that's it. Awkward ending and scene.
Yeah, awkward ending and scene.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
Bye. Thank you.
If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/SkiffyandFanty. You can also find us on our website, skiffyandfanty.com, and on Twitter at skiffyandfanty. If you'd like to send us an email, you can do so at skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. The music for this episode comes from Sphere by Creo. You can find out more about their music at freemusicarchive.org.